A rogue museum director experiences a profound conversion with swords on Spirit Inspire starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Spirit Inspire. My name is Eric Huff, and I'm joined with my friends and wonderful co-hosts, John Soul.
Hey, everybody.
Vincent Ricketts.
Hello.
Today we have a very special guest, a friend of mine and colleague, Dr. Nathan Jones. Welcome on.
Hey, pleasure to be here with you guys.
So, Nathan, I don't even know where to start with you. Usually when I have a guest come on, I've got like one or two things that I can kind of think of as a good lead up to introduce that person. To say you're a Renaissance man is definitely an understatement. So I guess I'm just going to throw it over to you to start wherever you want to start off. So you could be like, I was born a baby, or you could say what you had for lunch today or anything in between.
You could go back to Genesis.
Yeah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Well, that just might be the highest compliment I've ever been given, Renaissance man. Because those are vanishingly few these days, and I suspect that we probably could use a few more of them. But to give your audience an idea of who I am, I'm kind of relatively new on the scene. I mean, I haven't even been a Catholic for a year.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah, I was raised as a Protestant and converted June 17th last year. Got to see my boys baptized. My wife and I got to I say our vows yet again, but for the first time in the church's eyes. Which was incredibly special. Received for First Communion, First Confession, the whole bit. So, yeah, that was a monumental day of grace for my family and I.
And I was blessed I got to be there.
And yeah, you were there. You and Mr. Swearingen both came with your families, and so I remember that, and that meant a lot to us. So. Thank you for that. But yeah, I'm just a poor cowtown kid from the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. Born in Missouri, but I don't remember a second of living in Missouri. We moved to Oklahoma when I was so young, and so raised on the Chisholm Trail, literally. Was the only non-farmer type in our school. So I didn't quite fit in while everybody else was concerned with pigs and horses and cows and such. I was reading 100 books a year and winning the reading trophy in grade school, So I was always kind of inclined to be a nerd.
I didn't say it.
Well, I say nerd as a point of pride.
That's right.
Technically, yeah. There's dorks and there's nerds. There's a distinction, right?
I think I'm a geek. I think I'm like right in the middle.
Yeah, but nerds are the ones who inherit the earth, right?
Yeah, sort of. But we can get into that. That's an interesting topic, by the way. Didn't have a lot of money growing up as a kid, and so I played baseball well enough to get a scholarship to junior college. Hurt my shoulder my sophomore year. Had no money to go to school. Joined the Army. Fought in the global war on terrorism. Deployed 4 times. Got blown up too many. Saw some things, did some things there, came back, used my GI Bill to finish my degree at Oklahoma, Did go to Western Kentucky for a year, though. And I'll have to tell you that at that time, the history department at Western Kentucky was in Cherry Hall, which was on top of that big bloody hill.
Oh yeah, I went to Western Kentucky.
Dude, I every day up and down
history
that
classes.
stupid hill.
That was rough.
4 times. That was rough.
Also, an atheist professor can tell you to stop believing everything.
Well, yeah. And so, went back to Oklahoma, finished my degree there. When I finished at Oklahoma with my history degree, you start to wonder what in the world is it that you do with a history degree besides teach. I actually got admitted to a law school and turned that down to go to a program in St. Louis, University of Missouri there, where I studied history and museum studies as a master's student. Finished there because I'm a disabled veteran. I was able to get a preference in the federal hiring system and took a job at Fort Knox as first the curator and then the director of the General Patton Museum down there. Worked there for 13 years before I retired in protest because the direction the federal government was going diverged from my values and ethics and virtues.
Would you say that was part of your faith journey too?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of that, when I was leaving the federal service, all of that coincided with my conversion to the Catholic Church, and to the faith. Like I had mentioned, I grew up as a Protestant, and went to war as an atheist, and was sucked into the, let's say, leftist worldview because of vulnerabilities that I had with resentment and envy, which I suspect many people on the left suffer from. And so I spent some time as a leftist myself. And then it wasn't until I was working at Fort Knox, decided to continue on and get a doctorate, that sitting in class one day in classical sociological theory seminar at the PhD level, I realized that everything that I had been buying into was complete total farce. And so I actually navigated through the highest levels of the university system and came out on the other end exactly the opposite of what the people who were instructing me hoped that I would become. And all of that coincided with my conversion to the church as well. And so fast forward a little bit, I retired in protest in 2020 from the civil service, retired from the Army National Guard in 2020 at the same time, finished my doctorate in 2020, and was given a chance to teach at Holy Angels this past year as I was converting to the faith. So,
That's awesome.
yeah, that's a long, short story.
Yeah, you wrapped it up well.
That's good.
John, can you sit back just an inch? You keep cutting into Dr. Jones's shot.
Sorry, I did not realize.
No, you're good. I was
Oh,
like, there's no way to say it but to just say it.
That's just how it works sometimes.
So I guess, if you're in your, I guess we could call it your inaugural year of the faith, that makes you a neophyte. Was there anything as you were going through, and I'm sure you might still be wrestling with things, who knows, but as you were coming from this Protestant background and even an atheistic background, and very specific worldview too, were there any things that you really wrestled with that were a struggle for you that you might have overcome, that coming into the faith and maybe some of the theology or practices of the Catholic faith that were I wouldn't say a barrier, but something you had to wrestle with?
That's a very good question, and I can give a succinct answer and an explanation. No.
All right.
No, I really didn't.
Next question.
And the reason is because I actually came at the faith from an intellectual direction.
Okay.
Rather than a spiritual one, right? So
So would you say it was books or YouTube or specific?
It was just rationality and discernment, and it just made perfect sense, right? So like I said, I grew up as a Protestant, and no, I said I was an atheist when I served overseas. That's not entirely accurate. I should say that I always suspected that there was a God. I had just turned my back on him during that time. But, since then I had tried to gain an education, and I've had a lot of unique life experiences that I've tried to make sense of. And it's also worth mentioning that I'm a historian, and so I kind of look at events through the long arc of history, right? And, it's, if there is a God, and there is, then you have to assume all of the things that God says are true, right? And it's written here that these things are from the Holy Spirit, which is God. It's part of the Trinity. And then if the church claims that it's the one true church, and historically speaking, even Protestants cannot deny that it is the first church.
Yeah.
Right? It's the church that Jesus himself handed the keys over.
Yeah.
And so I kind of came at it from a kind of a logical, kind of more intellectual perspective. I mean, there's way more that goes into
the historian and the intellectual component reminds me of Newman, who has the famous quote, "To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant."
Well, yeah, and I'm also trained in multivariate statistical analysis, right? And statistically speaking, the Big Bang Theory is impossible, right? It's a 1 in 70 billion chance, and if you know how chances work, the law of chance is every time you roll the dice, the same number of dice, you start over with the chance, right? It doesn't decrease the number of times you roll the dice. Right? So, the Big Bang attempting to happen over and over and over again, it's a 1 in 70 billion chance every time you attempt it.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like, that doesn't even if you're an atheist, we would call that statistically impossible.
Unless there was an unmoved mover, an
Precisely.
uncaused cause.
Well, it's the only thing that makes any sense at all, right? And so, and couple on the fact that there's this religion, there's this tradition, there's this history that dates back to antiquity. Why was that worth preserving?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even if you're an atheist, you have to step back and say, why was this knowledge and this wisdom worth preserving? Why did it survive and not so many other things?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't believe in chance. As I demonstrated, I don't believe in chance. It's 1 in 70 billion chance.
And think of just cultural elements of things that people do consider to be important that you lose from generation to generation. Like there's so much that I'm sure got lost in translation, from my great-grandparents who I never met to my grandparents to now. That's a very in the length of time, at least the eyes of the church sees, that's a second. And yet we have this tradition that dates back that when we find, there used to be rumors that that the church had, the Bible had no accuracy. We don't know for sure if everything lines up. And then we find that, especially of even the Old Testament tradition, and then we find in Qumran those Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was very accurate, and almost entirely accurately preserved through the centuries. That one or two tweaks here and there, and it's a perfect representation that nothing about the message had been lost in any of those generations.
Yeah, and here's another reason why I don't believe in it's just chance, right? That those things were preserved, right? I'm like, you have to understand that at the time that those things were being preserved, those writings were being preserved, Christians were being hauled into the Colosseum for being Christians. I mean, my patron saint was martyred simply because he would not give a sacrifice to a pagan god.
Yeah.
And watched his entire legion be executed before he was finally done in.
Who was your saint?
Saint Maurice. Yeah. I mean, his relics were used in the coronation ceremonies of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire until the 1900s.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so...
But then Blessed Karl of Austria would have had those too, right? Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, his spurs and his sword. He preferred to die by the sword rather than to betray his Lord. And so...
Roman candles.
Yeah, but you have to understand that, these people were putting everything on the line.
Yeah.
But they were gaining everything too, right? I mean, martyrdom granted you sainthood.
Yeah.
Then. And so if you were killed in the name of Jesus and did not deny him, you were granted martyrdom in that first century. So the reason why all of those things are preserved can't be just sheer coincidence, because the people that were preserving them had everything to lose.
Yeah.
Everything to lose.
It's crazy too. There's and then you're a history guy, so maybe you can look into it, but I'd read a very old book that said that one of the history things that's glossed over now in the present age, after some of the progressive revolts in Italy from the Papal States, the original martyr of the Colosseum was the architect of the Colosseum.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they found his tomb in the catacombs. So the only documentation we have of it says Vicentius, or whatever the name of this guy was. It says martyr. And it's and architect of the Colosseum, and it has his blood and the palm branch, of signifying his martyrdom, and his remains in the one of the catacombs. So totally possible. And then also when they sacked the temple. In other places. So whenever the Romans destroyed something, they took back the architectural features that were a treasure and brought them back to Rome. That's why you see the obelisks, like the obelisk in St. Peter's Square. But the Colosseum was filled, or allegedly filled, with architectural pieces, even from the temple.
And in an interesting parallel, the Tsar who commissioned those in the Red Square, those really beautiful buildings with the weird kind of dome.
Yeah,
it's like a Hershey's Kiss on top.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, he had the architect's eyes put out so that they could never build anything more beautiful again.
Are you kidding?
And I think this is just a story of, this is what happens when you elevate human achievement to godlike status.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you get tyranny, you get evil. That's what you get. That's the original sin, right? That is just, that's what it is.
It's trying to extract infinity from finite realities. This is all there is.
Yeah, it's trying to be God, the creator.
Like a Tower of Babel situation.
Oh yeah.
Human beings should not worship the things they create any more than God worships us.
Well, I think what always interested me about history, as I've really studied this last few years, is that it's a narrative, it's a plot, it's a drama. It's not just dates and names and things you memorize.
No. It's the oldest. It's the oldest story known to humankind.
Right.
It's the hero's journey monomyth, is what it is. Joseph Campbell put his finger on this, and he was a secularist sociologist, an early one, but it's the same story arc, right? And I think that it's such an old story that it's encoded in our DNA almost. And this is the argument that I make in my book, not to shamelessly plug it, but this
Go right ahead.
This is the argument that I make in what I write, which is human beings, if you subscribe to the scientific theory of evolution, which is, as I understand, and you can all correct me as if I'm wrong, but is not in contradiction to church doctrine.
No,
so
you can definitely believe in evolution and
so
church doctrine.
If you subscribe to that, then what you have to understand is the story of the development of the implementation of the human soul. Secularists would call it consciousness, right? The arc thereof, from struggle to evolve to struggle to survive and beyond, is the hero's journey monomyth, right? And so it's so embedded in our DNA, I think, that that's why the scriptures were written in the same story. I think that's why, you can unlayer the Bible a trillion different ways and never get to the bottom of it. You know? But one of those trillions of layers of it is that it is written in a story that we as human beings could understand and relate to. Because this is the story of our species. We've come from humble beginnings. We've gone on a grand adventure. We've faced adversities along the way. We've overcome those adversities. And oftentimes the end of the hero's journey monomyth is not told properly, which is the hero comes back to his civilization and shares what he learned along the way. That's the hero's journey monomyth, right? And if you just lay the Bible down on top of that, it makes perfect sense, right? It's a struggle of the Jewish people. It leads you to the climax through the Christ, and he struggles and he dies and he goes to hell, but he comes back and he shares it with everybody what he knows through the apostles and his disciples, and they write it down. And
now the church goes through that same exact journey.
No, yeah, right? Precisely, yeah. And through the long arc of history, the church herself.
Oh my gosh, think about it like this. Like some historians say 1973, when Roe versus Wade was ruled, was the end of Christendom as we know it. And on some level, there's truth to that. Like Christendom is not utopia on earth. Christendom becomes this ascendancy on some level of the church's influence and land and possession.
It depends on what you mean by Christendom. Are you using the historical context? Because the historical context of Christendom was we were going to create governments which are either ruled by the church or ruled by the church, effectively.
Right.
Yeah. So it was
Christian monarch.
You had Christian monarchs, and everything was going to be done in the under the rules of and guidelines and laws of the church.
But has there ever been an era in the history of humanity since the founding of the church where there has been a post-Christian era with such an intensity as it seems today?
No, I don't think so. Because you have to understand what was going on during the rise of Christendom. We're talking about religious wars that were occurring there was the 30 Years' War that lasted, at least 30 years, right? So, you had war after war after war fought over religion after the revolt by the protesters. And so, who were riled up by a rogue Catholic monk named Martin Luther. And so and his arguments were so persuasive and people were so upset. It's not as if Martin Luther didn't have legitimate complaints that a lot of people had, right? But I often wonder what would have happened if Martin Luther had just waited like a month or two.
Let it die down.
Yeah,
let his feelings die down.
Because the church got rid of the indulgences that he was mostly interested in. And then perhaps we wouldn't have the dominant segment of Christianity in the United States being people who believe that they can interpret the Word of God for themselves. And then what that leads to is the atomization of the individual and then the atomization of the church. And I'm my own church, and, God described himself, he named himself as I am. Well, when human beings start believing that I am, they are replacing themselves as God. And so
disordered.
Yeah, and that's why Christianity itself can't agree on much of anything anymore, and that's just a natural consequence of a heightened individualism.
Would you think Rene Descartes had a lot to do with that?
Oh, truly. Yeah, truly. And not just him. It was the American experiment was mostly started by Scottish Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke and the like, right? So Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am. That was his most famous saying. Certainly would have. France has always demonstrated the extreme of revolutionary movements. So, I mean, the French Revolution was anything but democratic. The American Revolution was quite different. And it's such a pity that one of the myths that we subscribe to as a society today is that there's a myth of the greatness of America. The greatest myth is that there's a myth. It's not a myth. That's what happened. That's the way it occurred. And so you have people, and this goes all the way back to Herbert Marcuse in the 60s and his liberation ideology, where, you have fast forward from the 1960s to now, and you live in a milieu where, the majority of people think that the United States is some kind of structurally racist, bigoted institution that's only interested in maintaining white supremacy. I'm like, that could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
That could be further from the truth. It's a grand lie, But that's where we are. I mean, that's the spirit of Cain.
Yeah.
Those are the times in which we live, I think, is the spirit of Cain is descended upon us, where it's people motivated by envy and resentment, And the sad thing is you get it a lot from other Christians too. Like, if you're successful, then, then you're not pious. I'm like, well, I didn't understand that poverty was a Catholic virtue all of a sudden. I'm like,
or at least I didn't take a vow for it.
I'm like,
Right.
Charity is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely territorialism and parochialism in the church that has made it hard to really combat the secular problems that we're facing.
Yeah, and now's not the time for internecine conflict. Now's the time for some consensus, because the thing that we are facing right now as a society, people don't understand the gravity of the situation, how deep it goes, how embedded it is, right? Then you don't know what you're fighting right now. It's a battle of ideas, Yeah.
I think it's crazy. When I first started to have my conversion, had a lot to do with Fatima and those prophecies, and the ideologies brought this up to me is, Our Lady had revealed to Sister Lucia, Sister Lucia said that the last battle of this portion of history is going to be about marriage and the family, and I think a lot of I guess we could call them culture war issues. And I think begrudgingly as Catholics, I think we want to just, live our faith. And by living our faith, I also mean evangelizing, not just some private Martin Scorsese silence thing that we hide away, as Bishop Barron put it. Right. And Harrison Butker brought that to mind in his speech where he said some basic truths of the faith. I don't know. I think maybe some people could be critical potentially in the way that he did, but pretty basic stuff. And then the whole world just seemed like they caved in to tear it apart. And what he said had a lot to do with the ideas about marriage and the family and the way that he was taken out of context and thrown to the wolves.
Yeah, this past year I brought in a copy of the Communist Manifesto when we were talking about the Cold War. And, the Cold War was really an ideological battle more than anything. And, I wanted to show my students what the ideas we were fighting against. And I had it earmarked because my conversion began during the class in which I was studying Engels and Marx.
Yeah.
And
great fellas.
This is rubbish, is what this is. But he's very explicit about his designs. The designs of Marxism is the abolishment of the family.
Yes. It's not class warfare, rich versus poor. It's man versus woman.
Yeah. And
that's in Marx.
Oh yeah.
Well,
it's
yeah.
the very elimination of the sexual difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can and then you can trace Marx's ideas. Once Alexander Solzhenitsyn's work made its way back to the United States and was published, that totally discredited the
Gulag.
Yeah, the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
That totally discredited the Soviet communist system, right? But
you ever read Cancer Ward?
No,
it's super good.
Yeah. But once the intellectuals found out that the Marxist tropes didn't work, then they just started applying the same idea, right? It's a dichotomy. It's them versus them, right? It's always somebody versus somebody. It's always oppressor versus oppressed. And so, it's the same old trope, right? So you can apply that model to just about anything, sex. And that's what feminism is. Or modern third wave feminism at least, right? It's men versus women. Right. You can apply that to critical race theory. It's black versus white. Yeah. You can apply that to Marx's own framework, which was the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. It's always the haves versus the have-nots. It's always for
and creating that dialectic.
Well, yeah, and when you're contending with an idea that's all consumed with the idea of power, you have to take that seriously, right? Because that's what they're after, really, right? It's like they want to control the power so that you don't. It's not that they're trying to get rid of the idea of power. That's an inescapable fact of human life, right? It just is what it is. That's Smith's law, right? There will always be discrepancies in outcome. There will always be inequities, no matter how many times you try to slice that cake, right? Now, you can manipulate statistics by ideologically selecting which variables you choose to regress against each other. That's kind of where the state of academia is right now. But kind of fast forward a little bit. These are the things that I was thinking about when I was starting to wake up, that this was all just sheer madness.
Right? I thought you meant this morning for a second there. I'm going to be honest. I was like, man, this guy, he starts his day off right.
Well, yeah. It's the same evil. Human beings, we think we're so smart. We're so arrogant. We think we have all the answers, and we don't. And we try to overcomplicate things very often, I think, right? So it's nuanced. Well, it's complicated, right? Well, I'm like, Yes, but you have to understand human beings need to distill things down into a picture that we can comprehend, right? You can't like soak in the totality of human existence at one time any more than we can see the face of God.
Right.
Right. Like we can't begin to comprehend all of those things. And so we try to categorize things and make sense of things. And so you have to excuse when you notice a big trend occurring, you know. Social scientists forget that sometimes, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with the personalistic view of history, because it's not just, again, facts and figures and dates and names, but it's more like this affected persons, right? Just like our family history has details and things that led to thought patterns and behaviors and habits and whole lifestyles that then affected you, like the father-son wound, you know, and what goes back in generational wounds and spirits like that. And to find deliverance from that requires massive prayer and psychological treatment and all of those different hurdles. But on the same level with history, I mean, you talk about being deeply embedded in things. There are things that happened 500 years ago. People don't even remember that are affecting people today because of how it affected people 490 years ago and 450 years ago. And it just developed over time.
Cumulative.
Right. You can backtrack history, right, to understand why things happened fundamentally. But, you know, part of my studies to try to plant myself into the cultural zeitgeist of the moment in which those things happened, right? I'm a historian of memory. I study how things unfolded, of course, because I have to have something to measure against what I actually am interested in, which is how things were remembered to have happened, right? And memory is not history, but memory has a history. The way we remember things versus the way they happen, and why, right? Because I don't take for granted that some things were remembered as a society, right? And there's a reason why. You know Chesterton's fence, right?
Right. You don't tear it down unless you know what's going on.
A conservative would say, don't tear this down because there might be a reason why the fence is here. Liberal says, let's tear it down and keep pushing forward, right? So that's the fundamental difference between a conservative and a liberal, right? Like, I don't know, man. There could be something dangerous over there.
Have you heard Chesterton's quote just on liberals and conservatives? It's like, liberals want to mess everything up, and that's their job, and then conservatives' job is to conserve it so it never gets fixed again.
Well, right, but the thing is, as a functioning society, we need both types of people, I think, right? Because, you know, what if the conservative movement had won its way in 1325? How far would we have gotten technologically, societally, name it, from 1325 to now, if the conservative ideology, had not. And so liberal people are more, as I understand it, in the big five personality traits, liberal people are higher in trait openness, right? Which means they're willing to experiment with ideas and play with it. They live on the. I mean, give the Taoists their due. The yin yang kind of makes sense a little bit, right?
That's heresy.
Well, just perhaps, but entertain the thought for a moment. You know, I'm sure there's a Catholic symbol for the same thing.
No, it's good.
You know, liberal people are the ones who are on the line, the edge between the yin and yang, right? They're the ones who are pushing the envelope, right? And then conservatives are the ones that are saying, but maybe we shouldn't forget all of the hard-earned lessons we learned along the way, right? So you're trying to preserve the good things. You're separating the wheat from the chaff, right? The problem is well, if 75% of all new restaurant ventures fail, I would suspect that there's a high percentage of new ideas that fail.
Don't work.
Right. And so
when you're bringing
most
up
of their ideas don't work out, but it's when people are unwilling to admit failure of their idea that we kind of find ourselves.
That reminds me too in Eastern thought. So I think Hinduism is a pretty broad topic, but the opposite in that worldview is of creation isn't destruction. It's creation and preservation.
But
as
it can,
the two.
But it can lead to destruction, right? You can organize things. I think that in the yin yang model, there's the little circles that are over there in the opposite color. I think that those things represent, if one side is chaos, one side's order, then you can have too much order. Because that's tyranny.
Yeah.
Right? And you can have too much chaos because that's anarchy.
Yeah.
Right? So you can go too far either way.
I'd say it's about integration, learning how to find stability within the chaos of the world. Like, there are going to be things that don't feel like they make any sense, lots of suffering and things, but how do you maintain that sense of joy and certainty that things will make sense eventually?
We don't live in a utopia.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, these are the things that we can learn from our heroes, right? Patton was one who wasn't afraid to shake the contemporary consensus on things, right? He pushed the envelope, tried out new doctrines, new methods, and those things would work, right? And so he would continue on with things that worked and shed the things that didn't, and made his organization better for it. But we can learn a lot from these people still, unless the iconoclasts have their way, and then we're but it's very hard to erase an idea.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of the concept of sharing ideas and really helping people understand themselves better.
Yeah.
But both with history, like where we've come from, but also helping people have a deeper sense of hope in the future, because as the church has dwindled or experienced some level of collapse or maybe transformation over the past several decades, I think people have lost a sense of, first off, who they are as men and women and family, but also in the sense of community. I mean, can you speak to that idea of how do we reestablish community, not just in a social media technological age, but even just an age of indifference and increased secularization and ignorance about these deep topics?
Yes. So first of all, looking back in the long arc of history, the only thing that I can put my finger on that has stood the test of time, I mean, I've studied republics rise and fall and empires rise and fall and major world powers rise and fall. But there's a through line, and the through line is Christ's church. It's the longest still standing in operation institution in the world. I mean, institution, right? Judaism is a religion, but there's no institution of Judaism, right? We have a structure to our religion, unlike, as I understand it, after Judaism. So,
after the second temple fell, it's
so it's
hard to.
So the through line is that, right? And I teach about popes who had. I mean, there were anti-popes. There were two popes. There were popes fighting which one was pope. There was
Pope with illegitimate children.
Popes who had illegitimate love children in the Vatican with them while they were pope. I mean, I've heard of all kinds of things, but what gives me great hope is this idea. And I was mentioning this to Patrick the other day, but what gives me great hope is that if the church is Christ's bride, as we believe it is, and if Jesus Christ was true God and true man, because God understands what it's like to be human because he was human, right? He had that experience. And the church is the bride. What kind of a man would Christ be if he allowed his bride to fail? You guys are all married. You would probably, like me, never allow your bride to fail. Jesus Christ will not allow the church to fail because that's his bride.
And yet even in the Catechism it says the church must follow her Lord in his passion. And yet
Precisely.
there's some level of, it's death and resurrection. It's a Paschal mystery.
Tension.
Yeah.
Right. Things may get worse before they get better. I don't know. But I read the end of the book. I know how it ends.
Yeah.
We win.
We win at the end. Yeah.
We win. Right? And so now to the idea of community, we were told to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think we, as a society, have begun to use this word. Words have meaning. They're important, right? That's why we wrote dictionaries to explain words. We've overextended this word of community to a term that's no longer usable as a category because it's too broad, right? And so the approach that I like to take is love your neighbors as yourself. I love my literal neighbors as myself, right? And imagine what our society would be like if everyone just followed that.
Are you talking about people who live next door to you?
That live next door to me, right?
Right.
And so I'm like, it's like what Dr. Peterson says: clean your room first, right? Well, once your room's clean, where do you go then? You go from cleaning your room to fixing the world.
Who's
at the next day? I'm like, no, dude, you have to graduate that, right? So once you've got your home in order,
shout out to my neighbor Rick. He's a good guy. Rick.
Then I keep extending beyond that, right? Like my concern at the moment is my neighborhood, my parish, right? My home is in order.
It's crazy you say that. On the first episode of the podcast was with Archbishop Shelton J. Fobb, our ordinary here in Louisville. He said, we were asking him about all kinds of stuff going on in the culture and in the country and in the world. And he said that, I'm aware that all these things are out there. But he's like, God has entrusted me with my small share of the vineyard right here where I'm at. So he's like, it's my job to work on my piece of the vineyard, my piece of the puzzle, not to worry about all those things. If he was supposed to worry about them, and this is just the impression that I got from what he said, if he was meant to worry about those things, God would have entrusted those other things to him. And my goodness, his piece of the vineyard is probably not what he expected it to be up here in Louisville. It's such a good point. And, we're not used to, I think about it with the news, the headlines, like you see some terrible tragedy or something that happens. And like, if your neighbor, has, I don't know, loses a loved one or something like that, you're able to like go see them and like bake them a cake and like rally behind them. You're not able to even do anything for people 1,000 miles away that have suffered this immense tragedy. It does something to your psyche. It's demoralizing. Whereas, we're all going to face tragedy. It's a valley of tears, but at least you're given grace and control, and God has, in his infinite wisdom, put you where he wants you.
Well, that's what faith is. As I understand it, is, when you pray the Chaplet of Mercy, Divine Mercy, it's, you say the words, Jesus, I trust in you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but do you? Like, do you really trust in Jesus? Do you? Right? Then why are you getting anxious? Why are you getting nervous? Now, that doesn't give you license to sit back and do nothing. And I think this is where we're failing as men, is just indifference, like, yeah, we trust in Jesus, but also, yeah, we're supposed to put on the full armor of God, right, and speak the truth,
Yeah.
Right. No matter how difficult it is for some people to hear.
What is it? Those two things are often presented in conflict with one another.
You're here.
But they're
Right.
Well, no.
I've been soaking it in. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
They're often presented in conflict with one another, but they're really not.
Well, God
because
likes to work through people.
exactly, but it's the classic misinterpretation of Martha and Mary.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's Martha is working, Mary's not working, and if you look at that overly simplistically, you can think, the moral of the story is work bad, sitting down and praying good. Mm-hmm. But that's not it. It's that our work needs to flow out of a relationship with Christ, and so like
It's rightly ordered.
it's exactly what it is.
Otherwise, you
it's
become
the
a burnt out
orientation.
social worker.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
So like, you know,
I'm never doing that again.
Mary, Mary choosing the better part is not it's not just the sitting down at the feet of the Lord, but it's allowing everything that comes after that to flow out of that experience of conversion, and not just like that. It's not that Jesus is like, we just put the gas in the tank. Like Jesus is not the gas you put in the tank so then you can drive. He is actually the driver of the car itself, and he doesn't really need us. I think we're kind of like the 12-year-old in the passenger seat, and like he can give us the Google Maps or whatever. Like he knows where we're going, but like you can tell me when to make a right turn.
He wants to give us a chance. You know what I mean? And so we have a chance. I mean, God's will be done. It will be done. So whether we want to be a part of that is up to us.
Well, it's funny. We were talking about this Mary Martha complex and just how we make a difference in our community. We recently recorded an episode with Brian Kane, who also works with Holy Angels, and he and I have been working with Archbishop Fobb to develop a 9-year plan called the Great Novena to lead to the 2000th anniversary of the birth of the Church. And that has been an incredible process of learning how the structure of the Archdiocese works and just different ways to reach people in ways that they can really band together and relate to.
Yeah.
But it's all a prayer. And it's from that prayer that anything that we do for the sake of the Archdiocese, it could be bigger, but as Archbishop Fobb said, this is the vineyard that he's been assigned, but it's also the vineyard that we're growing in.
Yeah, and even so, I still come back to the idea of community, and I think that might even the Archdiocese is too big of a task to assume for most Catholics in Louisville. The first thing that you should probably ask yourself is your own house in order? And if it is, the second question you might ask yourself, I shouldn't say should, I'm not God. But the second question you might ask yourself is, do my neighbors see Jesus in me? Do I live my life with joy and gratitude and charity? Because that might be the only time that person's ever been exposed to Christ.
There's a great thinker of the 20th century, Michael Jackson. Just talking to the man in the mirror.
Yes.
He's the great philosopher.
To change his ways. So starting with yourself. It's really crazy how we were talking about the narrativity. The kids say this thing all the time about what is it, like main character syndrome? Is that the right word? Is that the right phrase?
I mean, you call it adolescent egocentrism.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I understand.
Yeah, it's like main character syndrome. This person has this. And but basically, like, you do have to look at the narrative of your life that God's given you. Is he's the primary protagonist, the Holy Spirit is. However, you're a main player in your own life, and it is the life you've been given, and it's the one that you have control over, your own actions. And
yeah. Now, you asked me a question earlier: were there any hurdles that I had to come into the Catholic Church? And I said no, and I stand by that answer. But I think that the reason is because the reason I didn't have the major hurdle that most Protestants have to coming back to the church is because I had already conditioned myself through my previous vocations to surrender myself to an institution and an organization bigger than me.
Yeah.
And now when you graduate the idea of American individualism out and couple that with Protestantism, which makes the claim that you can interpret the Bible and as you please, then you atomize the church. That wasn't a difficulty for me to overcome because I already done that before. And now this time, and those institutions failed me. Right? I didn't change; they changed, and so they were not the organization that I joined when I left.
Right.
So the difference is that the church doesn't change.
That was a key point for my wife, because when we were dating and talking about different issues, and we both grew up in the same parish, but we both had very different experiences of formation, and she told me one off-the-cuff thing I said to her once, because I don't even know what issue we were discussing, but the idea is the culture is always changing constantly about what allegiance it has to different issues or agendas or ideologies. And yet God does not change, and he's the one thing we can actually rely on. And that was something that I just took for granted, I just was used to. And when I said that to her, it was like a pivotal thought.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, look at the state of our youth in the country today. It's like we've got the highest levels of anxiety and depression. It's because our country's lost its anchor. And there's only one thing that remains unmoved. That was supposed to be our anchor.
Right.
Right. And even the founding fathers of the United States understood that the only way that a true democratic republic could work is if you had a virtuous populace.
Yeah.
And we've lost our virtue. And where does virtue come from? Right? There's natural law, but that still, in an indirect manner, still comes from God.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you cannot learn virtues. You can't just pull them out of the ether, right?
Right.
Even the ones that are natural laws still were ordered by God, and it's still from God, right? So
you have to cultivate it.
Yeah,
cultivate that grace.
And when we have a narcissistic society that's all on TikTok and everybody's wanting to be,
well, that's illegal now.
Snapchat or whatever the next great thing is. Everybody wants to be the center of the story, the main character. As you put it, it's just open narcissism. Is effectively what that is.
It goes both ways, that they want everyone to see, but it's also a false persona. I've thought about this a lot recently with the TikTok, and I spend a lot of time. I'm an old dude, so I get the secondhand store of TikTok. It's YouTube Shorts by the time I get to it, and I'll kill a bunch of time on there. And I honestly believe that I haven't learned anything from the internet that I've retained. Anything I've learned either came from another person in person, or from a book. So maybe I found something to write a paper with, and that's a little different. But any of the time killing stuff I've spent on entertainment or watching YouTube videos, I've retained none of it.
Well, we conflate too often information for wisdom. Those are entirely two different things.
Right. I think Father Mike Schmidt says in his Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year, it's not about information, it's about transformation. Mm-hmm. And when you're just focused on
He's got that trademark, John. I don't think you can say that on
here. Sorry, Father Mike. Anyway.
This is a parody.
Right, it is. Right. Sorry. But there's this level of the need to inspire conversion. and transformation, openness to changing our lifestyle, changing our behaviors, changing habits. And yeah, that's challenging when you're used to or comfortable with certain thought patterns or behaviors. But if we can inspire that, look, do you want to keep doing what you're doing, or do you want to be happy?
But God, the joy that it brings.
Right.
You know, I mean, ever since I converted to Catholicism, Patrick Paris was over at the house not too long ago, and he's like, "How you doing?" And I was like, "You know what? I am phenomenal. Like I could not feel more graced right now. I really could not. You know, I went through a martyrdom of sorts with my former job. I was pilloried as white supremacist and all these other nonsense accusations leveled against me, and my wife and I just went through hell. You know, it was a psychological toll that it took on us. But in all that, I was still converting to the faith.
Yeah.
Right.
Amen.
And when like I mentioned before, I've been overseas several times. I've been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I've seen psychologists and psychiatrists, and all of those things helped in some regard, but there was still something missing. There was a piece that was still missing, right? And taking inventory of the situation, right? I realized that the spiritual piece was the piece that was missing, right? And so
that's often missing in counseling.
Yeah, and much to its detriment, right? Because you know, the joy that I've found and the graces that have been given to my family since that event have just been humbling. And you know, when you tell God, "Lord, here am I, send me," and you mean it,
Buckle up.
You can't be surprised when the Holy Spirit comes knocking on your chamber door.
It's really hard.
Yeah. And
the only other thing I don't ask anymore is for humility.
No! Ask for wisdom. Pray for wisdom.
When you ask for humility, you better get
It's
ready.
going to be a bad week.
Always pray for wisdom.
It's going to be hard.
Wisdom.
Always pray for wisdom.
Yeah, if you ever have any doubt about your faith, just pray for humility and then see how humbled you are that week.
Well, humility always comes with humiliation, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and that's uncomfortable.
Don't like it.
That is uncomfortable.
Maybe we all need humility. No.
Yeah, but it's been phenomenal. It's been quite a ride, you know.
There's death and resurrection.
Yeah, you know, dedicate yourself one day to just telling the truth, no matter what, no matter who you're talking to, and see what kind of adventure you get to go on. Because it will take you on a wild ride. And over the past 2 years, I have gone on a wild ride. You know, I was a federal civil servant, tenured, you know, making 6 figures, high-profile executive whose name was bantered around the Pentagon for 2 weeks for being a rogue museum director. Who wouldn't get on board.
You should put that on your resume, rogue museum director.
Yeah.
It's going on. That's going on the intro for this episode. It's such a great time.
And then I found myself, like, within that year, I found myself a Holy Angels, right, teaching.
Yeah.
Dude, that's incredible.
Right.
That was in the job description when we were looking for someone. We're like, candidate must hold this degree. It's like rogue museum director preferred.
Perfect. No, I think of what you've gone on. It's the adventure of speaking truth with love, but in a way that even if you deliver it perfectly and in the most loving way, it's still not received well, and it can come across to others who are in the dark as too much, and they resist it, and that's the adventure, because then you're shuffled from one set of people that are in your life to another set of people because they reject you and cast you out of the temple.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to accept that.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's part of the adventure. You are going to lose friends. You will.
But it's worth it.
You will,
the end of the
but
day,
you're going to gain you're gonna gain like brothers. Is what you're gonna gain.
At the end of the day, there was a man who spoke the truth perfectly in every situation, never made a flaw, never made a mistake in what he said or how he said it, and they crucified him for it.
Well, sure, And what did that man once describe himself as? The way, the truth, and the light.
And it's the same man who inspired Paul after his death and resurrection. Write what he did and do what he did.
In the Republic, Plato says, if there were ever a perfect man, they would crucify him.
Is it true?
Yeah, there's other that it gets into a debate on whether they said they would flog him or crucify him.
Well, they do that too.
Or stone him. They'll say, but a lot of the Western translations will put, if there were ever a perfect man, he'd be crucified. Yeah,
that's so beautiful. You know,
that's so telling.
Nathan, I wanted to mention something about masculinity because I think it's so important. And you mentioned Ephesians chapter 6, put on the full armor of God, and one of those clear aspects of the armor is the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And so when you speak the word into people's lives, especially a word of truth, even if it's hard truths, it's going to pierce their hearts in ways that are painful.
Because it's a sword.
Right, exactly. It's literally a sword.
Right.
And that is important that we wield that responsibly as men, especially, so that we don't use it as a weapon to win arguments.
Yeah. And this is one of the, as I understand it, this is one of the misinterpretations of the Beatitudes, right? Because it doesn't even stand to reason observationally that the meek inherit the earth, right? The meek become doormats. The meeks get rung over, right? They don't inherit the earth. They might inherit heaven, but they certainly don't inherit the earth. But what the original translation of that verse meant was something the Aramaic was something more akin to those who know how to wield the sword but choose to keep it sheathed. Right? So it's basically...
Are you kidding me?
No.
Dude.
No. So it means basically...
That changes my entire everything.
Basically what it means is you have to know how to use the sword. You have to know how to speak the truth. Right? But you have to know when it's time to pull it out. And the thing is that a sword is not just an offensive weapon. It's also a defensive weapon, right? It's the ultimate weapon. It's used for offense and for defense. It can shield blocks. It can pierce, right? And that's why you have to be so careful when you apply that weapon, right? And that's what the Beatitude, as I understand it, really means, is... You know how to use it, pull it out when you need to, but only when you need to, right? Because we can turn off. This is something that I struggle with even to this day, is you can turn off people from the church by the way you behave.
Yeah.
Right? And so you don't want to come out guns blazing, right?
Especially if you're a neophyte.
Yeah.
Right. With all the zeal you're going to have, it's going to be hard.
Right? And I do. I honestly do come at Catholicism with the same zeal as I had when I was a evangelical Protestant. You know, it's like, but it's the good news. It's the word. You should be happy. Why aren't you coming to Jesus? What's wrong with you?
And then you pull your sword out and stab him.
Yeah. But I'm an old soldier, and one of my former bosses once told me, he was like, you know what your problem is, Sergeant Jones, or First Sergeant Jones? I'm like, I don't know, sir, I got lots of problems. He's like, your problem is that when you don't have an enemy, you're going to invent one. Yeah.
That is so true to many of us, even as Catholics today.
And so very often you're going to invent an enemy that's not really an enemy because you're so accustomed, you're so attuned to the fight, to the battle. Like once you've been in the quagmire for so long, it just starts to become a part of your being, and you're either on the defensive or the offensive when you're at war. And so,
dude, I have to share this because what you just said, like really pierced my heart in this way with the sense of the sword, because I'm just a guy who loves swords because I was
Because they're cool.
they're freaking awesome. Okay?
Well, if you're a red-bellied American man,
I am. I'm just that kind. Right.
That's actually how I describe it to people.
That's on his CV too.
Right.
Loves
so a month
swords.
before my wife and I started dating, before I would have ever considered that she would have been someone I would have dated, or she would have thought of me as that person, I received a sword from a good friend of mine. He gave it to me as a gift, and I didn't expect that or anything. And there's a whole story behind this, but when I gave it to her a year later as a gift, it became a symbol of our relationship in a way that it really pierced her heart.
Yeah.
And I had to learn the lesson, what St. Paul was trying to communicate in Ephesians chapter 5 before I could understand Ephesians chapter 6, which is husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and as he poured himself out for his bride. And I didn't know how to do that. And that's a story that is, I think, the second part of my interview that hasn't happened yet on our podcast that I would want, I think, my wife to be here with me for. But it's just the depth of that relationship between the armor of God and the sacrificial love that we're called to have for those that he has entrusted to our care, especially our wives and our children. And I did not know how to do that. And I'm obviously still learning that. But as we prepare to welcome our daughter in September, it's our first child. It's really coming to me more and more.
Ooh, that's coming up fast.
It is. It's coming really fast.
Yeah.
You better be ready, John.
I know, especially I think because this episode, if it doesn't air sooner, it might air in September. So we're like in that realm of like, it's happening.
You might already have a daughter by then,
Exactly. So you never
You're
know.
going to really need that sword.
Right. Well, she gave me another sword on my 33rd birthday last October, which was the sword Anduril from Lord of the Rings. And so I now have that, and it is pretty...
For what it's worth, Patton gave his wife a sword on their wedding day.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Did he? That doesn't surprise me.
It was the sword that cut their wedding cake with.
What?
He cut his wedding cake with a cavalry saber, and it had it etched on it. Had Beatrice Ayers Patton the day they got married, and he gave it to her. That was her wedding present.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Was that in your book?
That actually might be in the book, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Huh.
Yeah.
Is the sword still around? Is it at the Patton Museum?
Yep, it's down at the Patton Museum. Yeah.
That is so cool.
yeah, I have to hold it. It's pretty neat. Yeah.
There's so much to that, and the idea of being a man, right? I mean, how do you be a man today in a way that it doesn't come across as toxic or overly aggressive, or the passivity that we've created?
Well,
those are the toxic ones.
At some point in time, like, we started swapping out our heroes for victimhood status. We used to, as men, you'd be used to trying to identify as the hero, right? And
it was Luke Skywalker. He was whiny. He was the hero, and then he's like, I wanted to go to Toshi's station to get power converters.
Actually, I mentioned Luke Skywalker and Jesus in the book.
Do you?
Yeah,
that's awesome. Sorry to derail you there.
No, that's okay. But we started swapping this idea of like identifying as the hero in the saga, right? And we just become afraid. Like, since when did men become afraid of what people said about them or said to them? Or, it's like, when did sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me? When did that stop becoming a thing? Right? Like, you can say what you want to about me. I don't care, because I trust in Jesus. And what I'm saying is the truth. And I keep myself open enough to the Holy Spirit that if I'm veering off the course of truth, then I'll get corrected. But that's why you need to surround yourself with other men who also speak the truth.
Yeah. Amen.
You seem to have just answered your own hypothetical question there. When did words start? When did that phrase stop being true? And I guess the answer is when we abandon Christ, because if you don't have Christ as your foundation, what do you have? You're left with your own wretchedness and stupidity.
Yeah.
That then you have to mask with
willful ignorance.
Right, and you have to mask that with all these other kind of trivial, meaningless, like the trappings of masculinity without having the actual foundation of of the God-man himself, who's really the one who teaches us what it means to be a man.
Sure, yeah. I mean, but there's, like the question is always, what is masculinity? And that definition has changed in this country several times, to where we get to today, where the concept of masculinity is nothing but brutish and boorish behavior, right? And that's not masculinity, right? I mean, who's the ultimate man?
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, right? And we are meant to be Christ-like as Christians, right? And so why don't we model ourselves after the ultimate man, right? That's what heroes are supposed to serve in our society. That's the function they serve, right? Now, you can be a complete atheist, and I pray for you if you are. But if you are, it doesn't have to be Jesus. It can be any other of the heroes that we've established in our culture, in our society, right? But once you start telling the truth is going to lead you to more truth. And where does that road end?
Because every other hero is only a small foreshadowing of the ultimate hero.
Precisely.
The type of Christ,
It's always Christ.
That's all it is. And that's why the story was written that way. Because we can make sense of it. It makes sense to us as a species. We can take things for granted in that story that are completely absurd, right? Just that we would think would be absurd today, right? Plagues of locusts and frogs and, but we can, it's kind of like when we watch Pinocchio, we don't question why Pinocchio's looking up to a star. We don't really question why a fairy flies down, right? We take these things for granted, right? And it's not beyond it doesn't take a whole lot of cognitive dissonance to go along with the movie and the story as we know it, right? But because that's so ingrained in us, it's the oldest story ever told, and I think that's why God had it written that way.
Well, it's his story.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know if that's the actual etymology of history, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was some way of really connecting.
It very well could be. History as an academic discipline.
They actually call it herstory now.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah. History is actually younger as an academic discipline than sociology is. So the first historians were technically sociologists, and they were conservative. The reason they were conservative is because these sociologists were looking to the past for answers that might help explain our present. And so therefore, by definition, all of the earliest sociologists were highly conservative. Durkheim, he's the one I've studied the most, right? I mean, he was looking at Aboriginal tribes in middle of nowhere Australia.
I think they must have understood the old adage, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Yeah, and I really hate that saying.
I do too.
Right, because it insinuates that I'm some kind of soothsayer, right? Like I can tell you what's going to happen next.
In the future,
right?
Because you know about the past. Yeah.
Right.
All we really are supposed to do is give warnings about things that could possibly happen if you try this. Because if you do this is the closest analog we have for it as a model, right? And so I can give you warnings about what types of things have happened in the past if you do that.
Right.
Statistically speaking, right? But I can't tell you what's going to happen.
Just thinking about the A-bomb going off, that did not happen before.
But I'll say this, if the past doesn't necessarily repeat itself, it sure rhymes.
Yeah.
That's a good way of saying it too. And I think that's what helps us recognize that we are still unique, unrepeatable individuals that have a unique part to play in the story of salvation history, so that we take risks and we can't know the outcome completely. You can't fully predict it. And that's why I think faith is such an adventure, because you don't know what's going to happen with your life when you say yes to Christ.
Yeah. It's interesting that faith is the one aspect of religion that we Christians admit to, but the secular left will not. They exude an immense amount of faith as well, right? But it's just faith in false gods.
Right.
And so, it's it's great to have faith, but the real question is, what does your faith put in?
Right.
That's the question.
Right.
Everybody has faith. Are you believing in the right thing?
I
That
think
will save you from eternal damnation.
I think that's a good spot. Do you have any more questions, Vincent? You're looking at me like you did.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Dr. Jones, thanks for coming on. You've already kind of plugged your book, but I want like a full, real plug. Where can I get it?
Yeah.
And then anything else you want to promote or talk about?
Yeah, so the book's called Patton Shadow, The Making of a Hero in Modern Memory. It's a history of the memory of Patton. And so readers will find it interesting because I've researched Patton's fan mail. Like I went down into letters from Sally McClellan from Louisville, Kentucky, and what she was writing to Patton on his
Shout out, Sally.
anniversary of the D-Day invasion or something, but anyway, it's a treatise on the applicability of these individuals who can still inspire us that the iconoclasts are having their way with. And so what I try to address is the importance of why we should not so carelessly denigrate the lessons that we've learned on this grand adventure, because some of those lessons are certainly worth preserving. And so that's kind of the overall arc of the book. It's published by the University of Alabama Press, so it's technically an academic book, but because it's widely applicable, it is being sold on Amazon. It is being sold on the Barnes & Noble website. It's all available for pre-order right now, both the hardback and the paperback versions are available for pre-order. It should come out in about mid-October. And if you're interested in this topic, military history, the history of memory, the history of heroes, the sociology of hero veneration, I address all that in the book. Then it does help for authors and their publishers for pre-orders to mount, because that allows them to know how many copies they need to print and whatnot. And
Pre-order, folks.
yeah.
I got to get on there, getting the paperback.
Yeah, authors don't set the price. The hardback version is expensive. It's $100. So,
Dang.
but the paperback's 30.
How many pages?
$35. It's over 328,
Nice.
I think.
It's awesome. It's a solid tome.
And
Yes.
I, as an interdisciplinarian, I'm pulling in from multiple academic disciplines to make my argument in there. So, and I use secular academia's own scholarship against them in the book as well. And so, for those of you who like to wear tinfoil hats, you might find some glee in that.
That's awesome.
Victory. I do cite Jordan Peterson. I think he's the second citation in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which somehow escaped the editors.
Yeah, that's pretty early on.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to reading it. This has been awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been fun.
All right. And that wraps it up for this time on Spirit and Spire.